So we're back in the Turbo Otter from Milviz. I'm still having great trouble landing this plane consistently and smoothly without bouncing. So we're going to just experiment with that today and see if we can figure it out by hook or by crook. And we're going to do that just by shooting landings over and over again under various different circumstances. So let's go. Not the most elegant of takeoffs. You'll notice I've got some text coming up on the screen. I'm running a script, a Lua script here to give me the instantaneous vertical speed at touchdown. It was reading there because I was bouncing on the takeoff. So I'm using that just to give me some data about how hard I'm hitting the ground. You know, it's no surprise if you hit the ground too fast that you're going to bounce. I want to check that I'm not doing that. And we're going to start with the recommended approach speed from the manual, which says that we should be doing 80 miles per hour on final. Now I found that if we're doing 80 miles per hour, not only is it hard to land without bouncing, it's actually hard to land at all. This aircraft is very reluctant to sink under any circumstances, I've concluded. And even with the power to idle on short final, it's very hard to get the aircraft to come down. And when you flare, it wants to go up again, or at the very least it wants to fly level. It's kind of like, I remember flying in my short real world experience of flying aircraft, going from a Cessna 152 to a 172. The big thing about the 172 was, well, assuming it wasn't fully loaded with people, it had a great tendency to float on touchdown, and you do very long touchdowns. The effect is very similar here. So we're going to land here. Walter Sutton's. We're on, just turning on to final now. We're doing a little shy of 80 miles per hour. We've got the flaps at takeoff and landing setting. I'm actually on idle now. In fact, I better come off idle because we're going to land a little bit short if I'm not careful. Watch those wires. So that's about ideal in terms of approach height. We're slower than recommended, 70 miles per hour. And we're just going to try and touch it down ever so gently, if long. There you go. 200 feet per minute. And a bounce, and another bounce. Now we're down, we can use reverse. Now 200 feet per minute is not a hard landing. That is well within the range that we would consider to be a good landing, or an acceptable landing certainly. And we were doing 70 miles per hour on the approach there. So getting trimmed for 80. We're idle right now. We're doing about 600 feet per minute down, and we're going to land along already. No power here, just going to try and round it out without ballooning. Just try and hold it off. See, we're flying almost level there. Speed's dropping off, but very slowly. There's a bounce, 104 feet per minute. Again, that qualifies as a pretty reasonable touchdown vertical speed. Now this is a bumpy field, so we do have to take that into account. We might be better off taking this somewhere with a smoother strip, so we can just rule out the bumps as a factor. So what I thought we'd do is, we're up at altitude at the moment, we're just going to play around with the stall speed, see how slow we can get without risking a stall for the approach. That published approach speed 80 miles per hour seems woefully fast. So let's set it up kind of in the approach configuration, and we'll trim it further up than has been recommended. I'm trimming it. In fact, let's try and approach full nose up trim, see what we can get. So power's at idle, we're trimmed for about 60 miles per hour. We're in a descent which is about 600 or 700 feet per minute. And if you imagine we're going to do a flare over the runway right about now, I'm going to bring the nose up. Speed's dropping kind of fast. So that isn't too bad. And now we're at about 52 miles per hour. We've still got aileron control just about. There's a stall warner at about 50 knots. We're getting a bit of a rumble. I've got the yoke all the way back now, and we're starting to plummet. We're not really losing. I'm working the rudders here. Not really losing stability there. Problem is, as the speed goes, that vertical speed doesn't build up particularly quickly, which is why we float. Okay, so now let's try this with full flaps, and I'm going to trim it for 60 miles per hour again. Do an awful lot of winding of the trim wheel to get there. So in this configuration again, we're doing about 600 to 700 feet per minute vertical speed, power's at idle, and if we imagine doing a flare right about now, again speed drops off gradually. Vertical speed does increase, but not a great deal. In terms of the stall, we're now well below 50 miles per hour. Very nose high. Oh, there's the stall. And of course in the stall we have very little aileron assertion. So let's try that with no flaps. It's the next kind of logical experiment. Probably running out of trim now. That's about as slow as I can trim it. .550 feet per minute vertical speed. That's a little bit less than that actually. And if we imagine flaring there, I mean that's short of a balloon, but now that's better. That's better. Actually, the speed falls off quite a lot, or the vertical speed increases a little bit more rapidly with no flaps. So I think we'll try landing like that from 60 miles per hour. That's what we'll do next. So, no flaps. Trim's giving us about 65 on idle. Very nose high attitude. Going to probably need a little bit of power. Well, maybe not actually. No, we're still kind of high. Alright, let's do Let's try it from here. Well, not controlling the speed great there. Now that was difficult to even see what happened there, because the nose angle was too high really to even see. You see that nose attitude is far too high. Until right at the last minute, when that fully nose up trim really puts us in the 3-point landing attitude, which is kind of what we want at the last minute. So another experiment. I've come to somewhere with a much longer and smoother runway. This is Edwards Air Force Base in California. Hopefully this is going to get rid of the uneven surface of the runway as a factor, and we're going to do some experiments here. And it's a long runway, so we can just take off and land straight ahead. So using the conventional wisdom, we're approaching at about 80 miles per hour. We're on landing flap. Actually we're at 70 miles an hour, but we'll stick with 70. We're on idle, coming in fairly steep. I'm going to just flare, let the speed bleed off, try and hold it off. That was pretty good. That pretty much didn't even bounce there. So that's about 100 feet per minute touchdown. Let's try that again. I'm just going to let it go into its natural nose down attitude with this landing, takeoff and landing flap. Okay. Okay, idle. So that's the recommended approach speed. And we start to flare, staying on idle, trying to fly it down the runway, holding it off. I'm actually watching the vertical speed indicator, although that's not great practice to do that, because it does lag a bit. Well, that was 172 feet per minute, but we still didn't bounce. So that's kind of a steep approach. There's the flare. Hold off. See, we're flying horizontally pretty much down the runway. Our attitude's increasing a bit, so we're starting to sink there too fast, really. So maybe we're flaring too early. This is where working with the wide view is a lot better. We don't have peripheral view. I'm flying this on a single screen in the virtual cockpit for the purposes of the video, and I don't really have peripheral vision. Flying with my regular 3-screen setup makes quite a bit of difference. In fact, what I'll do is I'll do the same experiment. I use the widescreen setup, so I ought to be able to judge it better, and then we can look at it on the replay and see if it looks any better objectively. Now this isn't going to look great on the video because you're only seeing the center screen of my 3, but I've got much better peripheral vision now, and I'm going to lock out the track IR and let's do that again. Okay, there's 80, powers to idle. Well, that felt better and the numbers look better. 115 feet per minute. Still holding that altitude during the flare. There's a tiny bounce there, but that's not too much to worry about. And we're going to see just how short we can land this without bouncing. We're going to try and land it absolutely as close to the runway threshold as we can. We'll keep it at 60 if we can. Idle now. Okay, we'll have to plan B. Let's see where we touch down and then how far it takes to roll out. Okay, flaring about now. So that was a good touchdown. We didn't bounce as far as I could tell. That was pretty damn short, that rollout. Okay, back at Walter Sutton's, we're going to try and put all that experimentation into practice. We're going to try that approach on takeoff and landing flap setting, fully trimmed up, flying the approach at about 60 miles per hour, and see if we can put it down smoothly and short on the kind of strip that this aircraft is designed for. Don't forget, this is a super stall, or at least a stall aircraft. We should be well able to put it down on a rough strip without bouncing uncontrollably and stopping pretty short. Bit of power just to keep us afloat. Now don't forget, we're using this aircraft to get a sense of how well the turboprop engine is modelled compared to default P3D. It's much more responsive, I have to say. So that's a pretty good approach. Power to idle now, 60 miles per hour. Let's try that smooth hold off. Oh, we bounced. I think we only bounced once there, not 100% sure. Felt kind of low over those wires, but yeah, that's probably as low as we want to be. That's a pretty short touchdown. Oh, little bounce. Nice hold off. I think we touched down the tail wheel a little bit before the main gear there. Let's take it around the corner and try and land at Walter Moose's, which is an even shorter strip. And if we can do that, then maybe we've got it more or less licked. We're going to leave it on this fully nose up trim, and then land at 60 miles per hour. Taking off the... I need to master the takeoff next. I think we need to be getting the tail up first. So there's Moose's strip. We're not going to land this way because that's downhill. That would be disastrous. It's just off the nose to the left there. But if we just check it out as we fly past, very tricky strip. It's a very narrow strip. That's the main thing. It's actually kind of long enough and it's uphill. So it's not so difficult, but because it's very narrow, there's not much room for sloppiness. Watch out for the trees. So there's 60 miles per hour on idle, turning in and just coming off idle to drag us in. Trying not to do it as a super steep approach. That's windsock showing a bit of a crosswind. We're going to just kind of ignore that. Power off. Trying to flare. This is slightly uphill, so the flare is a little bit deceptive. There we go. Less than 70 feet per minute. I think that was a credible touchdown on a fairly marginal strip. Alright, so that leaves us with one last challenge. Let's see if we can put this down at 30 OR Barrow Field. We've got a very short cross-country flight to get from Vernonia, which is where we're taking off, to Barrow, 30 OR. This is a brilliant field. Both of these are brilliant fields in the Pacific Northwest. And Barrow is probably the most challenging orbic strip that there is to date. Very reminiscent of the Aussie X strips, I have to say. We'll take a look at the strip. We can't really there's two ways into this strip. There's and it's on a slight gradient as well. It would be to our advantage in some ways to fly from this direction and pretty much land uphill. The problem with that is it's kind of difficult to line up for that approach because there's a hill in the way. So what we'll do is we'll fly up the strip in that direction just to get a look at it, and then we'll take it out and fly back, land in the opposite direction. So it's kind of hard to find this strip. There's that sort of forked junction right off the nose there, and if you look up and then to the left, that's the strip there. Kind of difficult to see that. Look at that blue building just going out of view on the left there. That's going to be a marker coming in. So if we turn left abruptly here, that would be the uphill direction if we could land. But that's going to be pretty hard to set up. There's a horse in the field down there. I don't know if you can see it. So what we're going to do is we're going to fly out along this road over the hump that you can see just in the centre of the screen, and then come down that sort of valley. Now I'm going to set things up here. Going to put our approach, well, we're still on approach flaps. I forgot I was talking too much there. So we're on approach flap. I'm going to gradually trim us all the way nose up so we can do that approach at minimum speed. I'm just going to climb over the top of this hill, hugging the terrain pretty much, because as soon as we get over there we want to start descending. Flying in on a roughly 300 degree heading. Now remember that blue building I talked about, that should be coming into sight just now. We're not going to head for that. That's going to be off to our right. But if we hug this hillside to the left, fly over those buildings, the strip is now pretty much dead ahead. We want to just skim these trees. We need good power control here, and keeping an eye on that speedo, ASI rather. You can see this is a much more accessible approach than the other ends. Speed's good. Approach angle is reasonably good. A little bit high. Briefly on idle there, coming a little bit off idle. Trying to hold that speed at 60. We just want to squeak over the top of these trees and bushes I'm going to idle now. Oops, slightly into reverse by mistake there. That wasn't intentional. Just got to hold it off. We don't want to bounce here. The sooner we get that tail wheel on the ground, the sooner we can put in reverse. Whoa, watch out for the trees. And brakes as well. That was comfortably down and stopped. So Barrowfield, 30 OR.